Good afternoon, all of you. Welcome back to Tangled Bank. Today we have Dr. Rajeev Raghavan. He is going to talk on fishes, especially the freshwater fishes of Western Ghats, especially on endemic fishes. We are all excited and we are waiting for this talk for many days. Yeah, indeed. And uh, right now he is going to talk. Dr. Rajiv is going to talk on it. And forthcoming talks in this series is that by tomorrow, Professor Tarun Arora is going to talk on biodiversity laws at 9:30 a.m. Don't miss that, 9:30 a.m. And Dr. Anindita Bhadra, she is an associate professor at ISER Kolkata and also a past INEAS chair. She is going to talk on dogs in urban, ecology at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And then finally, Professor R.K. Kohli will talk on biodiversity and he will sum up the whole Tangled Bank series at 3:30 p.m. tomorrow. So please stay tuned. Dr. Rajiv Raghavan is a very well-known fish expert in India, and he has done PhD from Chinese Academy of Sciences. He's a recipient of the prestigious Chinese government scholarship scheme for the PhD. He is also a member of the IUCN's South Asia Coordinator on Freshwater Fish Specialist Group. And also he is a member of IUCN's Red List Authority Coordinator in Asia and Oceania. It's one of the very prestigious position to be enlisted as an authority in the Red List, the database of the IUCN. He has described 15 new species and 2 new genera and 1 new family of the freshwater fish. Remember, finding new species is very tricky because most of the fish have already been described, and he has done a fantastic job on these lines. He has discovered a unique blind subterranean shrimp as well, and that is a very interesting story, and we are waiting for this interesting story of this blind subterranean shrimp. And yes, so we are just waiting for it. And of course, he has got more than 150 publications in peer-reviewed literature. And yes, we are really privileged to have you here, sir. And welcome to Tangled Bank. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Felix, and the organizers for inviting me to give a talk as part of your webinar series. So, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
So, yeah. So today I'll spend around 20 to 30 minutes talking about the endemic fishes of the Western Ghats. I would consider myself very fortunate to be, living and working in this very exceptional region of freshwater biodiversity, because the sort of biodiversity that we have in the Western Ghats is unparalleled elsewhere, and there are lots of wonderful questions that you can ask to understand the different aspects of freshwater biodiversity in this region. So I'll just start by talking about what most of the freshwater scientists call as the freshwater paradox. So as you know, only less than 1% of the Earth's surface is freshwater. Is freshwater, and 99% is again marine. But when you look at the number of fish species, which is distributed both in freshwater and marine, you can see that 50% live in freshwater, 50% live, approximately 50-50 in freshwater and marine. But when you look at the area that freshwater has and marine ecosystems has, you can see that 50% of the fish live in 99% of the Earth's surface, and 50% of the fish live in less than 1% of the Earth's surface. So that 50% of the freshwater fish that lives in less than 1% of the Earth's surface is what we call as the freshwater paradox, because then we know the sort of stress that these freshwater fish face living in this very small area, but the diversity is extremely huge. And very quickly, if you can just look at these slides, you'll understand how much of stress freshwater biodiversity is facing around the world. So we got almost 75% of our wetlands have been lost since the last 100 years, and almost 50% of the rivers are not free flowing from their source to the sea. But the population along freshwater systems keeps increasing. We have around 2.7 billion people who live across the basins, the world's big river basins. And then you've got lots of electricity being produced from freshwater systems. So all this has finally resulted in catastrophic losses to biodiversity, freshwater biodiversity. You can see that almost 20% of freshwater dependent animals around the world are now threatened. And if you look at average declines of freshwater species, it's just not fish, but across the different groups, 83% of the populations of freshwater organisms have declined during the last 40, 50 years. And almost 150 plus species have also been declared extinct from the freshwater systems. So why is freshwater biodiversity important? So it's important from a biodiversity perspective because, as I said, there are almost 18,000 species, and 250 new species are being discovered every year, which means we still are keeping on discovering new species, and we don't know the actual extent of freshwater diversity in this world. So freshwater biodiversity is also important for food security. Almost 10 million metric tons of fish, freshwater fish, are produced every year, and 42% of this, so you can see almost 50%, comes from developing countries. So that's low-income, food deficit countries. So it's extremely important for food security. It sustains the livelihood of almost 36 million people around the world. Again, mostly in developing countries of Asia and Africa. So it's also important for livelihood and gender. As you can see, almost 30 to 40 million fishermen around the world depend on fishers, as now we call them, because it's a gender neutral term. And so 40 million fishers are found across the world who depend on freshwater fish. And 20% of this number is contributed by women. So that's the importance of gender in freshwater fisheries. So I'll just talk about three things in my talk today. I'll just talk about diversity of fish in the Western Ghats. I'll talk about the issues regarding sustainability, and I'll also touch upon some aspects of the conservation. So as I said, we're very fortunate to be working in this exceptional region, the Western Ghats biodiversity hotspot. It's said to be originated around 150 million years ago. The area is around 160,000 square kilometers. The north-south distance from, say, Gujarat to southern tip of Tamil Nadu is 1,600 kilometers. And the average elevation of these mountain ranges are around 1,200 meters. So this is Western Ghats in a nutshell. But when you go into the freshwater part of the mountain ranges, so Western Ghats is one of the three main watersheds of India. It's a catchment area that drains most of the rivers originate from these systems. It's an exceptional hotspot of freshwater diversity and endemism, as I talked to you about. And there's lots of international agencies have prioritized conservation efforts in the Western Ghats. So WWF has called Western Ghats a discrete freshwater ecoregion. The World Bank, so that the third point there is from a World Bank report, which is noted that Western Ghats is exceptional in terms of its freshwater biodiversity. So all this speaks about the importance, the significance of Western Ghats for freshwater organisms. So the freshwater systems of the Western Ghats are divided into two. So there are large rivers, around 750 to 1,500 kilometers, that originate from the Western Ghats and flow through the eastern side, the eastern slopes of the Western Ghats, and drain into the Bay of Bengal. And there are smaller river systems, maximum lengths of 200, 220 kilometers, that originate from the Western Ghats and flow towards the Arabian Sea. So this is the basic difference. We have large eastward flowing systems and very smaller westward flowing systems. So both these together encompass the freshwater ecosystems of the Western Ghats. So this is the sort of biodiversity in a nutshell. So we have got 326 species, of which almost 70% are endemic. So by that you mean 70% of the fish that you find in Western Ghats are found nowhere else in the world. They're exclusively restricted to the Western Ghats ecosystems. And when most people talk about endemism, they talk at the level of species. But here in the Western Ghats, you've got even higher level endemism. So there are 17 endemic genera, and there's also one endemic family of fish, so which is not a very common thing to happen in ecosystems. So there's one endemic family that's only found in the Western Ghats. So much of this diversity and endemism is as a result of geological isolations. So the Western Ghats and for that matter, Indian subcontinent as a whole was isolated for around 100 million years, ever since it split off from the African plate and hit the Eurasian plate. So that 100 million years of isolation has given rise to this fascinating diversity and endemism of freshwater organisms. So if you look at what sort of freshwater organisms are found, freshwater fish are found in the Western Ghats, you've got everything right from dwarfs to giants. So you can see from this photo, there is very small fish. So this is the adult size of a fish. Kilograms in weight. These are freshwater fish called masir. They're called the giant fish or mega fish of the world. So we've got a diversity of sizes. We've got diverse ecosystems where these fish are found. We've got fish in the Western Ghats that go below the Earth's surface in subterranean channels that I'll talk to you about in a little while. And we also got fish on the mountain tops. So this gradient of below the Earth and to the highest points in the Western Ghats, we've got fish everywhere. And then the most important aspect of Western Ghats fish is the sort of very evolutionary distinct organisms that you find here. So it's a place where you have very puzzling organisms which have no relation to other organisms found in this region. So the nearest relatives would be somewhere in Africa or in Southeast Asia, which talks about this evolutionary importance of this area. So there are lots of fish like that, and these are just a few that I've highlighted here. And when you talk about endemism, the endemism is not really restricted to the Western Ghats, but the endemism in Western Ghats is something that is very localized, what we call as point endemism. So there are species that are found only in a single river. There are species that are only found in very small areas, say a species that is found only in 50 square kilometer area, found nowhere else in the world. So there are the levels of endemism is extremely significant in the Western Ghats. So when you say endemism, it doesn't mean that the fish are found throughout Western Ghats. So they're very localized in their distribution. So when you talk about, in the field of conservation biology, we know very little about organisms, and these are called biodiversity shortfalls. So there are lots of biodiversity shortfalls. The most important of which are Linnaean shortfall, which talks about how much little we know about diversity. We have Wallacean shortfall that talks about how much little we know about distribution of organisms and so on. So the most important aspect that I would like to highlight here is the Linnaean shortfall, the concept that we know very little about what organisms are found in the Western Ghats. So as you can see, the fish explorations in Western Ghats started almost 2 centuries ago, 225 years ago. The first fish to be described from the Western Ghats or southern India was in 1798, and then it's spanned across time, almost 50 or 40-50 species being described every 50 years or 100 years, and it's slowly picking up. And this is a more sort of very specialized slide that you can see from what has happened during the last 10 years from 2009 until 2019. How many new species have been discovered every year from the Western Ghats. So this shows that we still know very little about what organisms are found in this region. And this is a result of our research, which we published just a few weeks ago, where we discovered 3 new fish from the Western Ghats, which was published in May 2020. So one of the most important highlights that I would like to talk to you today is this discovery, the discovery of the world's first snakehead fish by our team last year. So snakeheads are generally fish that are found in surface waters across Asia. We've got also some species in Africa, but this has been the first ever discovery of a subterranean snakehead fish, and it received very interesting it received extremely good interest from the media, because it was the first time that a snakehead fish was discovered from under the ground, and because nobody ever in the world would have thought that subterranean snakeheads would live in anywhere in the world, for that matter, not only Western Ghats. So as you can see, this fish is a very bizarre fish. It's extremely different with regard to its morphology. Not many people would have ever seen a fish that's very different like this fish that we called Enigma chana. denoting its enigmatic sort of puzzling appearance and the evolutionary distinct characters that it shows. And the most important aspect of this discovery was that it was made from a very common, very sort of a generalized ecosystem. So this is the ecosystem from where we got this fish. It's a paddy field where in central Kerala, which is frequented by people, and it was extremely interesting to find new, not only new species but even a new genus and very distinct species from ecosystems like this. So it shows that you don't really have to go to very remote places up in the mountains or forests to uncover unknown diversity. So it is in places like that, like this, you can find extremely interesting fish. So this is one of our colleagues who was with us looking for this fish in this paddy field in the night. So there's another very interesting discovery that we made last year about another group of fish that was never before discovered from a well or a subterranean system. So this is another example where we show that we know very little about what is found in subsurface environments in the Western Ghats. So this is a species of loach, which is found only in mountain tops, but we found in a homestead well in Calicut, near near a village in Calicut. Again, this is the sort of environment from where we got this fish. A very common looking environment, nothing special about this environment, but then it shows that there are very exceptionally important species that you can find. So there are also examples of fish that did not have a name for a long time. So this fish was known from the 1800s, from the British times, but it never had a scientific name. So we did work on this and gave this a scientific name 2 years ago. So it shows that even the largest of fish that is known to humans can go without being detected by scientists and given a scientific name. And of course, it was detected by people, but it never got a scientific attention that it deserved. So there are also examples of fish that have never been seen for the last 150, 200 years. So these are again examples of research that students can do, looking at lost fishes, going to the places from where they were first discovered from and seeing what can be done. So there are also fish like this that come once in a while documented by humans. So this is a fish called goonch. It grows up to 80 to 100 kilograms. And so this is again found in the Western Ghats, but only very rarely we find them. So this is an example of one such find 2 years ago. So before we could just get a sample from these markets, they were sold and cut and eaten. So it shows how important is even citizen science is now to understand the freshwater fish of these regions. So what do we do to bridge this Linnaean shortfall? So it needs a combination of works, as you can see, going to remote places, looking at undisturbed and unexplored areas, going to museums and finding fish that are there collected by people 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and then also a combination of genetics and molecular techniques. So this is a snapshot of the discoveries that my team has made over the last few years. We've described close to 18 new species of fish and shrimp in the Western Ghats. So which shows that there's still lots of fish to be discovered. And two important ecosystems which still remain unexplored for fish. One is Myristica swamps in the Western Ghats, and the second one is this the wells, the subterranean channels that are found throughout the Western Ghats, from where we made some of these extraordinary discoveries. So these two are ecosystems that still needs a lot of studies. So you can see this fascinating, sort of very unique organisms that we find in the subterranean ecosystems in Western Ghats. So none of these are snakes; they are fish. They are, members of the group eels. Many of them are blind. Many of them have, characters that are very exclusive to living in subterranean channels, like reduced fins, absence of fins, reduced eyes, absence of eyes, very small size, etc. So then to understand more about freshwater biodiversity, we need to look at, as I said, museum collections. We need to do advanced techniques, including molecular techniques. And so this is the illustration there shows you a fish, as I said, the golem snakehead, and the photograph below that, the image below that is a CT scan of its skull. So which shows that there are very advanced techniques through which you can understand the anatomical, very minute anatomical features of fish. So just like we do CT scans for humans, CT scans for fish have become extremely popular. There's also this issue with cryptic speciation in the Western Ghats. So cryptic species are species that are very morphologically very similar, indistinguishable when you look through your eyes, but then they have extremely different genetic structure, extremely different anatomical structure. So there's a range of such species in the Western Ghats, which are possible research opportunities for people to work on. So this is about the diversity in the area. So going into the human side of things, so the riverine communities and how they depend on freshwater fish. So freshwater fish is always taken, as a commodity that fulfills food security and livelihood needs, but not necessarily as a commodity for biodiversity and conservation. So as a result, conserving fish and managing fisheries or their harvest is a very difficult balancing act. So it's always the food security and livelihood aspects that get more attention and get more importance than conservation of fish. So when you talk to people in fisheries departments, or when you talk to people in general, they say there's no problem in harvesting fish because all the fishing that takes place is very small scale, very minor, and it doesn't really affect fish. But through a series of studies, we have shown that even small scale fisheries, the impacts are not always small. So it depends on which fish you are harvesting, what is its life history strategies, what is distribution, how much of effort you are giving. And so it depends on a whole lot of factors. So just by saying that, it is small scale fisheries doesn't mean that the impacts to the fish is always small. As you can see, there are lots of destructive fishing practices which are very harmful to the fish, like poisoning using plant poisons. So dynamiting is extremely popular in many parts of the Western Ghats, where they completely take away fish from an ecosystem by dynamiting these waters. There's also a threat from aquarium fisheries. There's lots of export of endemic aquarium fish from the Western Ghats. So we've looked at this in detail. So more than 100 species of endemic fish, and many of them are very localized endemic fish, are exported from India. So this is a very sort of emerging area of concern. And then fishing for migratory species, when people exploit the migratory behavior of fish during the monsoon seasons, when they migrate into floodplains or other areas to breed, so they take advantage of this migratory pattern. So you can see this is a huge issue in states like Kerala, where they have lots of migratory fish harvest in the monsoon season. So what are the threat levels of fish in the Western Ghats? So 1/3 of all species of fish found in the Western Ghats, and 50% of all endemic fish in the Western Ghats are threatened. So by threatened, we mean that they are either listed as critically endangered, or vulnerable. So these are 3 threat categories on the IUCN Red List. So the take-home message is that 50% of all endemic fish in the Western Ghats are in one of these 3 categories and deserves conservation attention. And unlike terrestrial systems or marine systems, you can never think of any human-mediated or any anthropogenic threat that finally does not impact freshwater systems. So any threat that you can think about that is man-made finally has an impact on freshwater systems. So the usual suspects are overharvest, water pollution, the modification and of flow in water, rivers, invasive species, habitat loss. So these are the 5 main stressors or threats. And all of these are either individually or synergistically interacting with each other and causing issues. And then you have a 6th issue with climate change also becoming a more important threat to freshwater systems, again, interacting with either one or many of these five stressors. So again, this is just a slide to show that how different threats finally impact the freshwater systems. So these are very interesting maps where you can, if you can focus on our region, the Indian subcontinent, Western Ghats, you can see that the maximum amount of habitat loss in freshwater systems have occurred in India. So you can see that almost 50 to 60% or more of wetlands have been lost in India. It's more in coastal wetlands than in freshwater wetlands. So India is not doing quite good with habitat loss. So I'm just quickly going through the different threats to freshwater ecosystems. As you can see, one is quarrying and mining. So you can ask me, how does quarrying and mining affect freshwater systems? Because you don't see any freshwater ecosystems nearby. But here is a photo of an ecosystem that is just below these areas which are mined. So this is a cave in the northern Western Ghats near Mahabaleshwar, which has a very peculiar type of fish. Again, this is a fish, not a snake. An eel, which is a threatened species on the IUCN Red List that lives in these caves, which are threatened by large-scale quarrying and mining. So whatever happens on the surface can also impact the ecosystems below, which is not really aware for most people. Then I would call this the invasion of aliens in Wonderland. So Western Ghats, as I said, it's a wonderland for freshwater organisms, and you've got huge number of alien species invading our water bodies. So this is a photograph of an African catfish, which is one of the most deadliest invaders, which has taken over the entire ecosystems in Western Ghats. You can see this huge fish being caught from a reservoir in Kerala. So this reservoir is near the famous hill station of Munnar. It's called the Matupati Reservoir, and the only fish that remains now is this African catfish. So it's taken over all the entire native species spectrum of this reservoir, and finally this carnivorous fish is the only fish that remains there, and it's being caught for human uses. There's a very sort of a sad map that you can see of invasive species across Kerala. So you can see that there are very few rivers or water bodies without alien species invasion. So they're everywhere. They're spreading right from north to south, east to west. So the red spots show alien species that are of food significance, and the green ones are alien species which have ornamental or aquarium significance. Again, snapshots of invasive species. The problems with dams, in the Western Ghats. So very striking statistics here. Just less than 3% of the rivers in Western Ghats are free flowing, and we've almost lost 12 to 30% of natural flow in these water bodies. And the problem is, in most of these rivers, it's just not one dam; it's a cascade of dams. So if you have a river of 100 kilometers long, and when you have 5 dams, so that means you hardly have 20 kilometers stretch of free flowing river in between these dams. So this cascading effect is again of significant concern. The other problem with dams is that most often when you have a dam, you have the Fisheries Department building a hatchery as an offset to biodiversity loss. But the main objective of this hatchery would be to sort of breed the fish that are impacted by the dam in the river. But most often what happens is the fish that are actually bred are alien species from different parts of the country and even different parts of the world. So it finally doesn't serve the purpose. So this is again a consequence of dams coming up, indirect consequence of dam coming up. Again, snapshots of what happens downstream of a dam. There's other problem with sand mining, especially in the southern part of Western Ghats. Huge amounts of sand is taken over from these river systems. So in Kerala, there are studies that almost 7 to 10 centimeters of riverbed have been lost due to sand mining. It primarily affects fish that live and breed on sands. So when the sandy substratum is transformed into a muddy or other substrates, these sand-loving organisms lose their habitats, and they face localized extinctions. Pollution, huge problems with pollution. Again, you can never think of any pollution that does not have an impact on freshwater ecosystems. A very striking map here that shows this is a global river pollution map, and you can see, India is right there in the center of attraction, receiving a lot of pollutants into the river. Another map which again shows India is not doing good is the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that are entering freshwater systems. So huge pollution there as well. Plastic, again, India is not quite doing well with the amount of plastic that is entering its river body. So almost anywhere between 2,000 to 10,000 tons of plastic enter the river systems from the terrestrial habitats. And freshwater systems are used for a variety of purpose. For humans, this is a very publicized photograph showing river pollution in the river Periyar in Kerala. You can see the two very drastic sort of water quality, you know, the environments created by polluted waters and clear waters in the system. There's lots of agro-based pollution, lots of plantations for tea, coffee, cardamom are there in the Western Ghats. Most of it receives a lot of insecticides and pesticides, which finally drain into these waters. Again, a very a sad photograph of plastic pollution, but there are lots of NGOs and groups that are trying to make a difference here, taking plastic out of these water bodies. People leave clothes in these rivers, and finally when these rivers dry up, this is the scene that you can see. Extreme climatic events. Kerala has been witnessing extreme climatic events during the last 2 years. Lots of floods happening, and during these floods there are lots of very unique fish that we never thought occur in these water bodies being flushed into these bodies from aquaculture farms, from hatcheries, which have no biosecurity facilities. So when you have a huge rain or a flood, these hatcheries and farms, they break, the ponds break away, and then all of these fish are released into the they escape into these nearby water bodies. So there's two very carnivorous, extremely dangerous fish that we have now recorded from the water bodies of the Western Ghats. I'll just quickly talk about this very interesting paper that came out in PNAS a few years ago that talked about how much of fresh water would be available in Western Ghats by the year 2050. So it says that millions of people in the Western Ghats would go without fresh water by the year 2050, and which shows that there will be a drastic competition between humans and biodiversity for fresh water as we go in the next 20 to 30 years. So this is an extremely important concern, and Western Ghats is one of the most important areas which they have highlighted as a concern for freshwater availability. There's also a complex web of jurisdiction concerning freshwater ecosystems. There are a lot of government departments are concerned with the governance of these systems. There's water department, there's irrigation department, there's fisheries department, there's power and electricity department. So all of these departments have some sort of stake. And then, finally, when it comes to decision making, when it finally comes to governance, there's sort of loopholes that each of these departments create. And the end result is that freshwater biodiversity is the sort of at the receiving end. So are we doing enough to conserve freshwater fish of the Western Ghats? I would say no. Science and knowledge, do we have the science and knowledge? We have extremely limited science and knowledge to inform conservation. There's very little awareness. Many people are aware of marine biodiversity, but they're not aware of freshwater biodiversity. There's extremely limited funding and investment for freshwater when you compare to terrestrial and marine ecosystems. There is very little institutional mechanisms. And when you look at conservation plans, there's absolutely no conservation plan for any freshwater fish. It's not just the case of Western Ghats, but throughout India, there's absolutely no conservation plans. So if you probably, there are conservation plans for Gangetic dolphins, but if you look at fish in particular, there are absolutely no conservation plans. So there is, so these are the sort of main issues that is hindering the progress of freshwater conservation biology in the Western Ghats region. So again, those who are familiar with aquarium, public aquarium. So this is one of the most important ways to attract children to inculcate education and awareness in the Western world. But we don't have any public aquarium that do that in India. So this is one area that the government needs to focus, try to build more public aquariums and use that as a mechanism for education and awareness for freshwater biodiversity. Fisheries education. We all, I teach at a fisheries university. I'm sure there are lots of students from fisheries universities joining here, from students learning zoology as well, biodiversity, etc. But most of them learn about marine fish. They learn about fish from outside India, but very frequently they learn about our endemic species. So I'm sure if people ask, people are asked to say about the names of 10 fish, they would obviously say 10 marine fish or 10 fish that are very popular from elsewhere in the world, but they don't have an idea about the endemic species that we have. So this is a focus that needs to be changed. So again, I'll quickly go and just take 10 minutes more. So about protected areas. So how well are freshwater ecosystems protected? So the protection is only for the terrestrial system. So if you look at a protected area like Periyar Tiger Reserve, so this is an example that I would like to show. So this is one of the most famous protected areas in India. Protection for tigers, elephants, for the large mammals. But not many people know that you have around 6 to 8 endemic species that are found only inside the Periyar Tiger Reserve and nowhere else in the world. So when you talk about Periyar Tiger Reserve, people talk about elephants, tiger conservation, Project Tiger, but none of them are really aware about the lower groups that are extremely endemic and localized to these regions. So this is again another aspect of freshwater conservation. So most of these fish are revered as gods. They are part of religion, folklore. This is a photograph of Sringeri temple in Karnataka, where people feed fish as God's fish, and they are all protected there. But there's also this paradox here, where you can see that there are also temples or places where they feed and grow invasive fish. So this is an alien species, an African catfish that is being fed in a temple. So which sort of undermines the whole concept of religion and freshwater conservation. When you have areas where you protect native fish, there are also areas where you protect invasive species unknowingly. So this also has to change. So what has been the past of our rivers? So this is what the past of our rivers look like. Giant fish, 150 kilogram fish, 60 kilogram fish. But what I would say the future of our rivers would be, fish like this, alien species, invasive species, would definitely take over our rivers in the future. So I'm just completing my talk by just taking just 2 minutes about making you understand how freshwater biodiversity is invisible or extremely poorly represented in international conservation mechanisms. So if you, and I'm sure people are familiar with the Aichi biodiversity targets, with Sustainable Development Goals. So there's when you look at Sustainable Development Goals, there's Goal 14, which is about life below water. So people would think that it is about freshwater systems or any systems which are aquatic. But when you look at Sustainable Development Goals, you can see that the entire focus is on marine and coastal ecosystems. So if you look at Target 14.1, it talks about reducing marine pollution. 14.3 talks about reducing ocean acidification. 14.5 looks at conserving coastal and marine areas. So there's absolutely no focus on freshwater systems in even these international conservation and sustainable development mechanisms. So I would like to end by saying that we sort of pump in a lot of money. The government's pumping a lot of money for space exploration, astronomy, astrophysics, and so on. And the amount of money that people spend for biodiversity, or the government spends for biodiversity, is extremely little. So this is the message I would like to give, that life on other planets are they very more important than life on our planet, because we don't yet know how many species exist on Earth, exist in the Western Ghats, exist in our rivers. But now we are spending millions of money to understand what is there in the other planets. And again, for those who are into popular writing, you can see that there are a host of books being written on marine ecosystems, very popular articles from Rachel Carlson's to other people, but none of them have focused on freshwater ecosystems. So with that, I would just end my talk. This is my team at my lab back in Cochin. I'm sure many of them are also joining this talk today. So I would like to thank most of these people, as they have been the sort of backbone for the research that we do in our lab, doing all the field work and lab work, and finding new species and so on. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. It was really a fantastic talk. And yeah, you have touched upon a lot of subjects, including SDG. Not many people are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. You can exit your PowerPoint presentation now. Yes,
Uh,
you have covered extensively on the anthropogeny, how the human, the conflict between a man and the environment. And this morning I woke up with terrific news. Actually, the elephant news. I'm also from Kerala. You might know that, though my name doesn't sound that way. I'm really ashamed of being a Keralite. I'm Malayali. Could you
We
able to
all,
hear me?
yeah, we all are. Yeah.
Could you able to
I
hear
think
me?
Yes, yes.
My internet is really flaky today.
so. No problem.
Hello.
Dr. Rajiv,
Yes.
yeah, it was very informative lectures, and definitely I got many new things that I never heard about this concept. Freshwater ecosystem. You starting with the freshwater ecosystem, and then key point of the freshwater ecosystem is the fish. You also mentioned the diversity in the conservation strategies of the freshwater ecosystem. I really appreciate your way of talking about the freshwater ecosystem and their importance in the sustainable development. And you also mentioned the sustainable development goals for the marine as well as the freshwater ecosystems. So let me start to ask a few questions from the audience as well as from our sides. Me and Dr. Felix ask the alternative questions. So my first question is very simple, that as you told earlier, freshwater ecosystem diversity is going to decline along with the time. So basically, what is the key point on the base bottleneck phenomena on which we can work, and we can at least delay such type of the you can say delay such type of the removing the freshwater diversity. So how can we act on a particular points, and we can at least protect the endangered species in freshwater ecosystem?
So I think the key point here is that compared to so we have got three general ecosystems. We've got terrestrial ecosystems, we've got marine ecosystems, and freshwater ecosystems. But freshwater ecosystems is the least understood ecosystem, and to in order to increase that perception of freshwater ecosystem among the common public, so that's the most important aspect here. So we need to make people aware that there is an issue for freshwater biodiversity. There are endangered species in freshwater ecosystems, that these species are being threatened by human mediated disturbances. So not many people know all this. So people, when they talk about aquatic, the word aquatic, it's mostly marine. So many people know what are the problems in the sea, but not many people know what are the problems in our rivers and lakes. So I think the key point here is to educate the people, make them aware. So it's reaching the common public, getting the message across to common public is the most important long-term sort of strategy that we need to adopt to improve freshwater conservation.
Yes, Rajiv, I was telling you about the news that I read today, the terrific news about the elephant death. So, do you have any comment about it? I'm really ashamed of being a Malayali, and this is happening in Kerala. So it is really terrific that pregnant elephant, the yeah. So it is actually the conflict, the man and the wildlife. The conflict is actually alarming, and I think your talk is also full of this conflict. In the later part of your talk. Yes.
I think as you said, not only as people from Kerala, as humans, we should be really ashamed of what has happened to
Exactly.
the animal there. So I think I'm not an expert on man-animal conflicts, but taking an example from the fish world. If you recollect the images of some of the subterranean fish that I showed, so most of these fish are found in wells, wells from which people take water to drink, and for all their domestic uses. And most often when you so there are only two ways through which you can find these fish. So one is when these wells are cleaned and dried during the summer, and when and sometimes rarely you get these fish coming through the taps. when your home tap is connected to a well, then you got these fish coming in through the taps. So most often what people think is, they mistake it for a snake. They, think that, these fish, contaminate the well water and they kill them, and they're the most harmless creatures that you can ever find. So they don't do any sort of contamination in the waters. They don't harm anyone. They're not poisonous. But the sort of attitude is to kill any organisms that come into your way, and they think that it is harmful. So this is sort of mindset that most people have, which should gradually change by education and awareness. So I think again I'm going back to that point of awareness and education. So I think those are the two key things that we still need to sort of do a lot.
So, Rajiv, as you told earlier, you worked in the China, in the Wuhan, in 2005 to 2009 during your PhD. So, may you highlight the contribution of the Wuhan in the science and technology and today contribution in the COVID-19?
Well, I think it was a beautiful place when I was around, and so I have only very fond and good memories of the city, and it's a city that I always like to go back. But sadly, all these unforeseen circumstances have happened. Uh, you know, uh, but I always like the place, and it's sort of the educational and research hub of China. There are lots of scientific institutions that do work in variety of fields, right from sort of human medicine to aquatic sciences to astrology and geology and so on. So they've got lots of institutions, lots of universities. I think it's one of the most important educational hubs in China. And it's sad to see people showing that in a bad light.
I am totally agree with your statement that Wuhan is a very famous in educational and its immense contribution in the science and the technology. So my next question is, you use the word endemic species in particular area, few species, few genus. So you are making such type of the statement on the basis of the earlier reported from all over the worlds. This is not reported, so that's why it is the endemic. Or you really proved that there is no chance of the availability of this species in another place in near future and the far future also.
The concept of endemism, as I talked about in my opening slides, is because of a lot of factors. So there's geological, factors, for Western Ghats, so the isolation for millions of years, then the climatic factors that would have caused so it's a combination of factors. So most of these species have no chance that it occurs anywhere else in the world. uh, we don't really even have to look for them, because we are 100% sure that these parts of our evolutionary tree occur only in this region here, or either in the Himalayas or the Western Ghats. So of course it involves field work and collaboration with people from across the world. We do talk to people from the other regions of the world where similar species may be found, maybe found or may occur, and then we sort of confirm that the finding is true.
So we have shared one interesting video to all the participants. So if you're listening, so probably you might have seen that video by, it's a TEDx video, and the video is by Mara J. Hart, a marine biologist. So the video is about the secret sex life of, the fish, the ocean fish, and it's amazing to see that the fish can change the sex, from male to female and female to male, and it's an adaptive strategy also. So we have a question from Shribin from Kannur, and Shribin is asking, are human actions causing havoc on sex lives of freshwater fishes too, just like the marine fish? And are there any studies in these lines?
But I think most of these sex change mechanisms are exclusive to marine fish, mostly reef fishes and so on. So there are two types of mechanisms. One is protandrous and one is protogynous, males changing to females and females changing to males. So there are two types of hermaphroditism there. Well, they have been there, in existence for a long time, and right from when we have been studying these organisms. But there are also, they're not very typical examples in freshwater that I can give. but I'm sure maybe not related to sex change, but there are pollutants that can interfere with the reproductive mechanisms in freshwater fish. So persistent organic pollutants or any of these chemical endocrine disruptors and so on. So there are possibilities of pollutants disrupting the reproductive cycle, but we are not yet sure whether there are documented evidences of pollution caused sex changes in the freshwater systems.
So thank you for such a nice, you can say, explanation of this question. So let me ask a question from the Sustainable Developmental Goals again. So do you differentiate the marine and the freshwater ecosystem from each other? And have you think about to draft the two different sustainable goals for both the marine as well as the freshwater ecosystem? So what will be the point for the freshwater ecosystem and what another points for the marine marine water ecosystem, and what will be the common points for the sustainable development goals in these two ecosystems at least?
So most often, what happens is that so although there are I would consider three different realms: marine, freshwater, terrestrial. So most of these international conservation mechanisms just talk about two: terrestrial and marine. And when they talk about terrestrial, they do include freshwater under terrestrial. So, so there are some. For example, 15, SDG 15 talks about forest and terrestrial ecosystems, but there are also some very, few points that they include freshwater and inland systems together with terrestrial. So they say forest and rivers. But what we want as freshwater conservation biologists is just like marine systems get their own attention, own focus. We need freshwater systems to get their own focus. So it always happens that freshwater is clubbed with terrestrial systems. So when you talk about aquatic pollution, they talk about marine pollution, not really about freshwater pollution. But we want to change that and make sure it is explicitly mentioned that stop freshwater pollution, stop freshwater invasions, not really aquatic invasions or aquatic pollutions.
Yeah, great. Very
Yeah.
good explanation from your side. Yeah, Felix.
Yes, so Rajiv, I was actually living in the morning also. I shared that, and in Japanese culture, there are a lot of festivals like Koi Matsuri, the carp festival. And can you say something about Indian folklore, Indian mythology, and epics? Of course, the rainbow fish is quite famous, so as Matsyavadara. And what do you think about the folklore on the conservation of the fish?
I think right from our historic ancient scriptures and religious and folklores and so on. So fish has always played a very central role. And if you look at ancient literature and ancient scriptures, there's always been some sort of protection that's been afforded to fish. And this has continued. As I said, I showed you some slides of temples protecting fish. Well, this is not exclusive to Hinduism as a religion. There are also places elsewhere in the world where there are ponds near churches and mosques which protect fish. So fish has been part of several religious folklores and ancient texts. So in India specifically, many people consider fish as god, and they do worship fish in many of these temples, and they make sure that the fish that lives along the temple. So most of these temples might be built along river basins. So the temple authorities make sure that the rivers, the fish in these rivers are protected. People offer feed or food to these fish, and there's no fishing allowed. And there's also fishing is considered as a taboo. So there are also beliefs that when you kill a fish there, it can affect your even survival. And there are also cases of people falling into accidents, getting lots of health problems and so on. So there is this very intricate connection between religion and freshwater fish, which is a very good thing. And I think this is something that we should really exploit as a very informal mechanism of conservation, because there's very little formal conservation mechanisms of fish. So these are things that are very informal, but we can sort of improve uh, and make sure that rivers are sustained, fish in these rivers are sustained.
There is a Kimi from the Batinda. She asked a question that how the electric eel are able to generate the electricity.
So they have organs. They've got anatomical and structures where they produce electricity. So they are inbuilt organs that produce electricity, and they are very typical marine organisms. But there are also other electricity producing organisms that you find in the Amazon. There are also freshwater fish in the Amazon that produce.
Alex,
Yeah. So my internet is kind of flaky, so don't worry. Okay, you don't have to wait for me. So now next question is that this is from Sanji from Delhi. He's asking, what is known about existing the cross kingdom symbiosis between freshwater fish and bacteria and plants and fungi? Is there any cross kingdom symbiosis between freshwater fish?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. It's not really in my remit of research, but I think I've heard about a very recent discovery of a bacteria in the gills of a fish that is able to convert harmful ammonia into nitrogen. So that's an example of symbiosis that I can. But this is typically marine. Uh, but there's also other examples of from the marine system of anglerfish. So there are fish called anglerfish, which has a bioluminescent bacteria, so which attracts both prey. So the fish can prey on, and also they attract mates. So these are some of the symbiotic relationships that I can that come uh, to my mind.
so there is a Prachi from the Bhopal. She asked bioluminescent bacteria. Do all type of the fish harbor this type of the bacteria or not?
No, no, no. They're very specific species that harbor these bacteria. So one of the examples I gave you just now, anglerfish, angler, anglerfish, which has a bioluminescent bacteria, which helps them to find prey and mates. So there might be other examples also, but they are very specific, species specific, not in all.
In your presentation, you told about the 5 different points which are required for the conservation of the freshwater fish in the Western Ghats. So, from where you get those bar actually? You are making a value for those one at the highest one that we have to cover for the conservation of the freshwater fishes in the Western Ghats. So, in them, you got some green color as compared to the red color or the dark color. So, from where you get that reference values actually?
So those values were rather very symbolic, just to show that the amount of information that we have. So that's absolutely not based on value, but based on our experiences of working with these organisms. So how much of knowledge we have. So how much of money and investment is given to freshwater organisms and so on. So those are very arbitrary values, but it just shows a general trend on what are the most important aspects that we need to bridge in order to progress this science.
So, one very silly question: are human beings are the point endemism on the earth?
So probably not, because we've been expanding throughout the world, unlike restricted range fish. So I think one of the most interesting, it's a good point here, because fish are not able to move across boundaries, because they can only move through freshwater systems. We have boundaries that are terrestrial or oceanic. They can't move from one place to the other unless they are human mediated. So these are the sort of very peculiar nature of freshwater fish.
Uh,
There is some problem, I think so. But I have another
yeah.
question.
Alexis.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So, tell you about some freshwater fishes which we can use at our home or in the, you can say, for the herbarium. Yeah, you can say in the aquarium. So, in aquarium, what type of the fishes we can use, and they are from the freshwater or they are from the marine water ecosystem?
This is a very extremely important question that I think this message has to go across to all the people who keep fish at home. So most often what happens is that most of the fish that people keep in their aquariums are not native fish. They either come from South America or they come from Southeast Asia or other parts of the world. So 90% of the people who keep aquarium fish at their home keep alien species. And the most important pathway for alien species to end up in freshwater ecosystems is the aquarium sector. So you buy a fish, in 6 months it outgrows your tank, and then the only thing you do is to release them into the nearest water body. So that's one way that alien species end up in natural water bodies. So I would strongly encourage people to start keeping native fish and not buy alien exotic species, because this is one way that alien species end up in our natural bodies. I mean, it not might not be uh, you know due to sort of what do I say? It might not be doing it purposefully, but there are also cases where, as I said, floods come, there are ponds that break, and then the fish gets released into these nearby water bodies. But most often it's when the your size of the fish grows big and it outgrows your tank at your home, and then you can't do anything with the fish, and then you just throw it away. So I think that has to be stopped. The message is to keep native fish and to stop keeping alien species.
I think it's a very important topic that alien species, because even our vice chancellor is also into invasive and alien species. About the Professor R.K. Kohli, so he's working on plants. Yeah, so that point is
Yeah,
very
yeah,
important. And yeah, we have a question from Ram Kumar, and Ram Kumar from Pune is asking, which reference will you recommend to identify the freshwater fish from India? Are there any dichotomous identification keys? Which database will you suggest to check the existing diversity of this group?
That's again very interesting question. So this is another gray area in the freshwater fish world. Uh, there are absolutely no field guides or books that I can suggest, basically because most of the field guides and books were written before the 1990s, and so much of knowledge has advanced during the last 20, 30 years that it's difficult to sort of identify a fish based on those old field keys and dichotomous keys. So that is one area that we still, as scientists, even I'm responsible for that, for not creating a updated a field guide. So I can't recommend a good authentic field guide, but I would say that whatever is available now, I think there's a book, "The Water Fishes of Indian Subcontinent" by Dr. K.C. Jairam from the Zoological Survey of India. I think that's a sort of book that I could recommend, but not the best. But from whatever is available, that is the best. And then in terms of databases, there are two databases that are very commonly used. One is called FishBase, which I'm sure everybody working on fish use. It's called FishBase. But the problem with FishBase is that you can use it for any purpose other than taxonomy. And for taxonomy, specifically for taxonomy and nomenclature, there's a database known as Catalog of Fish. So if you just simply search Catalog of Fish on Google, then you are directed to that website. So Catalog of Fish is the authentic, globally accepted database for taxonomy and nomenclature. And for everything except that, people can use FishBase.
Is there any app-based system or citizen science initiative?
So not in India that I know of. There are several outside the country, but the problem is before designing apps, we are not even in a position to sort of understand what is there in our country. So we still keep discovering new fish, and
So, okay, there is another question, Dr. Raghav, from my side.
sure.
So, when there is a pollution, immediate we release some pollutant components in the river, freshwater rivers. So, how can immediately fishes sense this pollution in the water, and they start to migrate in the mass migration from one place to the another placement? So, is it possible mass migration is associated with the pollution only, foods only, or due to some another reasons also?
No, so migration is governed by a lot of factors. So there is migration for finding food. There's migration for finding mates, for finding areas for reproduction. Most often there's I mean pollution definitely causes organisms to move from one place to the other, because the habitat which is polluted may not be conducive for the fish to survive, because there will be very low levels of oxygen, high levels of other chemicals, etc. So although the primary sort of factor may not be pollution, the primary factors of migration are different. So feeding, reproduction, etc. But I'm
So
sure,
we
yeah.
mm,
No, no, but
so
I'm sure movement is linked to pollution as well.
okay. So we have a question from Dr. Kriti, and she's asking that about the pedicure. What is your views of this? Is there any Indian fish that can be used for pedicure, and does it work? And what property of the fish is useful for pedicure?
Again, this is I'm not tried. I've seen fish pedicure facilities not only in India but across the world. So the fish that is so this again comes back to this question of alien species. So most often the fish that is used for pedicure is an alien fish called Gara rufa, which is a Southeast Asian fish. But there are also species of the same genus that are found in India that has the exact sort of behavior, the exact sort of feeding mechanism that can be used instead of this alien fish. But the reason why they prefer this alien fish is because these fish is captive bred and available in large quantities, whereas the Indian fish has to be taken from the wild. There's no technology for breeding them. So that's one reason. And it's mostly the scale or the skin eating character that is being used by these organisms to as a reason for predictive.
So I heard a very interesting statement from you during your presentation. Sand mining is also associated with the conservation of the biodiversity. Yeah, we agreed 100%. But do you think sand mining is only associated with the fishes, or it is also associated with the conservation of some another animals? So what are the name of those animals, yeah, organisms in which sand mining is directly impact their conservation?
I'm sure any organism living in aquatic systems or in freshwaters that prefer sand. I mean, it can be mollusk, it can be crustaceans, it can be other invertebrates. So there are specific substrates that each organism likes. Some organisms like stones, some organisms like sand, some organisms like mud. So it all depends on which organisms are sand loving, because some organisms only lay their eggs on sand. So it needn't necessarily have to be fish. It can be any aquatic organism, right from invertebrates to vertebrates. The only thing is, at some point of their life history, sand has to play a critical role.
Okay, so we have a question coming from Goa. Binoy is asking, can marine fishes like hilsa be cultivated inland as to decrease the stress upon the marine resources? Again, not your expertise,
Yeah,
but still.
but definitely yes. So this is again a very interesting question. So there are marine organisms that can be farmed or cultured in freshwaters, or what they call as low saline waters. So they gradually sort of adapt to low salinity conditions and finally freshwater or zero ppt water. So it is possible. So there are you were asking about hilsa.
Hilsa.
So there are possibilities, not possibilities. There are studies that have taken place in Bangladesh where they have farmed hilsa in freshwater systems. So although it is in a pilot stage, there is still room for improvement. They're still standardizing the technology. But the message is that it is possible. It is a technology that has been used for several species, several marine species, trying to culture them in low saline waters or even in fresh waters. But they gradually keep adapting to this new environment. So it is possible, yes.
So during the freshwater conservation of the fishes in plain area, how can we integrate this farming of the fish along with some other animals, so farmer can get the double benefits?
Yeah, so there is this concept called integrated fish farming or integrated fish culture, where they farm not only fish but they farm poultry, livestock, and so on. When they can farm ducks, they can farm chicken, buffalo, etc. and the excreta of one of these organisms, becomes the fertilizer for the pond. And so it's a cycle that, can, so each uh, sector can, sort of be productive and can contribute to the final revenue from that system. So this integrated farming system of, having livestock and fish together is very popular. It's been, used for, possibly hundreds of years in different parts of India.
Yeah. So, well, off the topic, one question, because you are from you did your PhD from Wuhan, so there are a lot of conspiracy theories spreading all around the internet, and the fake news, everything is there, and many people do believe that it's actually Chinese conspiracy. It's the COVID-19. So, what is your take on this? Of course, you are not an
So,
expert, and still,
so,
what is
well,
as a scientist? Yes.
Felix, I would like to add one more thing, sir, along with your question. So, Dr. Raghav,
Sure. Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah, please.
yeah, yeah. So, do you believe there is another hospital, yeah, CDC laboratory that is along with the that particular, you can say, wet market? I think they are the two laboratory for the viruses. One is, I think, 16 miles far away from that wet market, and second CDC laboratory that is just very close, only just 50-meter far away from that market. Is it true or not?
No, I can tell you that I've seen the wet markets. I've been there, but I've not really, looked at what is, surrounding that wet market. So I'm not really sure about the institutions that are nearby. But certainly there is this wet market that I've been to. And regarding the conspiracy theories that Felix talked about, I'm saying I'm no one to, comment on any of these things. But definitely, I think, there are possibilities that uh, it might have originated from one of those institutions, but we never know. It's all very wild speculations, wild theories that people put forth. So but it will be good to understand what happened and what caused this COVID. So that's definitely something that, like me, everybody associated with Wuhan would like to understand in detail.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
yes, Rajiv. Yes, so I
So,
was also always saying that this is something to do with the man versus biodiversity conflict, and because the science has already been debunked this myth, as a lab made, and the AAAS science, there's a very famous, the article has already been published that it is actually coming from the forest. So I think the conflict is actually our conflict is the main reason for all this struggle, isn't it?
I perfectly agree. Yes, I think it's the man
Someone
versus
is gone again.
biodiversity, sort of conflict that underpins the entire, story, the entire scenario.
so,
Yes, yeah, thank you. So, yeah, do you have any comment to make, Vinay? Dr.
no,
Sanjeev is
it's
also
okay.
here. You may talk. Yes.
So, Dr. Raghav, it's a very informative lecture. We got too much knowledge about the freshwater conservation ecosystem and the fishes in this particular ecosystem. So, definitely, many thanks for such a very nice informative lecture. And I appreciate your efforts during this series. And yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Rajiv, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, my internet is very flaky today, but still, yes, so somehow I managed, and it's wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was absolutely a fabulous session, and you threw light on many interesting facets of the freshwater fish, the life and its times, and the importance of conserving the fish and the alien species. You covered so many things. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. It's been a pleasure, joining this
Yes.
webinar series, and extremely grateful to have been invited, and joining a lot of other, what I call biodiversity rock stars who have who giving talks over the last 1 week. Thank you, Felix, and thank you, Vinay, for this invitation.
Yes, yes. So next in our talk is Professor Tarun Arora is now going to talk on biodiversity laws at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. So please be stay tuned. 9:30 a.m. tomorrow is a special session. Then Anindita Bhadra from Mysore, Kolkata on talking on dogs in urban ecosystem at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And finally at 3:30 p.m. tomorrow is going to be Professor R.K. Kohli and followed by the valediction. So please be tuned. And I will see you all tomorrow. Goodbye, all.